Good afternoon, and thank you for joining Blacks in Analytics Tableau User Group for our very first event. I am Kathy Devoe, the Executive Director of Blacks in Analytics, which is a program of the Datalingual Institute, a nonprofit organization with a vision to build, empower, and mentor a diverse talent pipeline in analytics and data-centric technologies. We believe that valuing and harnessing diverse voices and perspectives can shape insights, algorithms, and emerging technologies that can benefit all. We started the Tableau user group to provide a forum to connect with a community of diverse analytics enthusiasts to explore topics at the intersection of data, culture, business, and social change, where data really impacts human stories. Today, we are excited to collaborate this event with PolicyLink. PolicyLink is a premier data-driven research and action institute dedicated to advancing economic and social equity. They focus on policies affecting low-income communities and communities of color. Our panelists have come prepared to offer innovative ideas on how leveraging data with Tableau can lead to social change. We are excited to have the Columbia Data Science Institute, who is an academic partner to the Datalingual Institute today. And we'd like to introduce you first to Dr. Desmond Patton. He is the Associate Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the Columbia Data Science Institute. He is also an associate professor at the Columbia School of Social Work. Dr. Patton's research utilizes qualitative and computational data collection methods to examine how and why youth and gang violence, trauma, grief, and identity are expressed on social media and the real-world impact they have on well-being for low-income youth of color. Dr. Patton, will you tell us about some of your research and the exciting things going on at the Columbia University Data Science Institute?
Absolutely. Good afternoon and good evening. It's so very good to be with you all today. My name is Desmond Patton, and I leverage social media in computational methods, including machine learning and computer vision, to study issues of trauma, violence, and substance use on social media platforms like Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. But today I'm actually here to talk to you about my new work at the Data Science Institute. I'm very excited to introduce to some of you the Master in Data Science program at Columbia and our new Master's Diversity Fellowship Award program sponsored by JP Morgan. So the Master's in Data Science at Columbia is a 30-credit program offered in collaboration with School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, and the Data Science Institute. The program offers students in-depth training in data science and the opportunity to work closely with diverse faculty members and our industry affiliates through our part-time and full-time options. The curriculum is a mixture of computer science and stats courses and includes 9 credits of electives. Our students have the option to conduct original research and will complete a capstone project, which gives our students practice using their data science skills in a project-oriented class, while also gaining exposure to ethics of managing large data sets. The curriculum includes both theoretical and applied courses, so our graduates are going into workforce not only knowing how to do something, but why they're doing it. Applicants don't need to have an undergraduate degree in a specific major, but students do need to have strong quantitative and programming skills, specifically in either Java, C, C++, or Python. The application for the fall 2022 will be available in September. But I'm very excited to tell you more about our JP Morgan program. This is a new endowed scholarship program that we offer at the Data Science Institute. So the funding opportunity is for the MS in Data Science students from historically underserved or underprivileged populations. Support is guaranteed for 2 semesters of full-time study, including full tuition, fees, and a stipend to cover living expenses in New York City. Fellows will also be invited to complete an internship with JP Morgan, and renewal for the third and final semester of the program is contingent upon completing the internship. Interested applicants will apply to the MS in Data Science program and then submit a reflection for the fellowship through the application system. I'm going to put the link to the application in the chat right now so that you all have it. Here we go. And that is it. So I'm happy to take any questions, or you can also reach me. I'm gonna put my email address in the chat as well. But it's so good to be with you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Patton. I'll turn the program over to Nicole Smith, who will introduce the remaining part of the program.
Thank you, Dr. Patton, and thank you, Kathy. My name is Nicole Antoinette. And one of the things as I was preparing for today's session, I'll be the moderator for today's discussion on leveraging data in Tableau for social change. And as I was preparing for today, one of the things I remembered, I had a recent trip to the Legacy Museum in Montgomery, Alabama. And that museum displays the history of slavery and racism in America, which includes enslavement of African Americans, racial lynchings, segregation, and racial bias. In one section of the museum, there is a wall with leaders who have fought and currently fighting for injustices. And you will see in that museum, I saw pictures of, the first one I ended up seeing was Shirley Chisholm. I saw pictures of Martin Luther King, Harriet Tubman, and thousands, well, hundreds of more of leaders. And at that point, the tears became uncontrollable in my eyes. And I asked myself, what am I doing to fight injustice? Am I doing enough? In that moment, I can honestly say, yes, but I can do more. So my hope is that I will be able to learn from the panelists today on how I can use my knowledge, my skills, and my ability to promote social change through data. Now, one thing for sure, I did march in the 60s in the front line, but my march can be in front of this computer, fighting injustices as a new front line. Therefore, let us all get ready to learn how we can create our own front line to fight injustices by leveraging data. So today we welcome three, not one, not two, but three panelists for you. Today we welcome Imani Marshall. She was raised in Chicago and now lives and works in San Diego. Both cities have taught her about identity, power, health, and place, which she studied as a political science major at Amherst College. As a Bill Emerson Nation Hunger Fellow, Imani developed programs and conducted research to improve low-income mothers' access to breastfeeding support and healthy foods, and WIC's national participation and retention rates. Now, as Mid-City CAN's evaluation and learning analyst, Imani applies her research, data analysis, and evaluation skills to support Mid-City CAN's programs, organizing, and advocacy. She also dedicates her time organizing efforts and research expertise to several San Diego organizations fighting for Black liberation and youth empowerment. This work builds off her past community organizing experience with President Obama's re-election campaign and contributes to continued local advocacy and community organizing efforts. She is passionate about working at the intersections of healthcare, public policy, and research to promote well-being in communities that are surviving systemic racism and oppression. Welcome, Imani Marshall. Next, I would like to welcome David C. Turner III. He is an activist scholar from Englewood, California. Growing up, David recognized the need for change as many of his family members were impacted by mass incarceration and the war on gangs. To David, the personal is political, and it has moved him into a life of organizing for social change. As the manager of the Brothers, Sons, Selves, David leads a coalition of 10 community-based organizations working to end the school to prison pipeline and decriminalize communities of color. David brings more than 8 years of experience to Brothers, Sons, Selves Coalition as a seasoned youth organizer and educator. David currently teaches at the collegiate level, including classes on hip hop, research methods, education, and comparative ethnic studies. As an activist, he has participated in a movement for Black Lives as a political education specialist, helping organizations with teach-ins and designing curriculum. David received his BA in Africana Studies from CSU Dominguez Hills and his MSED in Higher Education from the University of Pennsylvania. He is currently a fifth-year doctoral candidate in the Social and Cultural Studies and Education program at UC Berkeley, where his research focuses on youth-based social movements, political identity, and resistance to prison regime. Welcome, David C. Turner III. The next, I would like to welcome Mark Philpott. Mark is a managing director at Policy Link and has deep expertise and experience in the boys and men of color field. As a leader of the Policy Link Boys and Men of Color team, he provides technical assistance in support of My Brother's Keeper communities, is a consultant for the Executive Alliance to expand opportunities for boys and men of color, and is the principal coordinator for the Alliance for Boys and Men of Color, a national network focused on building community power and transforming policies and systems that harm boys and men of color. In his role at Policy Link, Mark oversees the development of new strategic Policy Link partnerships and projects that contribute to the overall health and success of BMOC, their families, and communities. Mark has been a leader in BMOC field for nearly a decade and serves on the board of directors for the California Immigrant Policy Center, as well as Partners for Dignity and Rights. Mark is also on the advisory committee for USC Equity Research Institute. Prior to joining Policy Link, Mark worked in the president's office at PATH, a nonprofit global health organization. He holds master's degrees in public affairs and public health from the University of Washington in Seattle and earned his BA in history from Xavier University of Louisiana. Let's welcome Mark, David, and Imani.
Thank you so much for that full introduction, Nicole, Antoinette. I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this inaugural convening with the Blacks in Tableau user group. So just by way of background, I want to take some time to set some context for those of you who are listening to us today. As was mentioned, my name is Mark Philpott. I use he, him pronouns. Live in Oakland, California, where I work. Been at PolicyLink for 12 years now, and the work that I've done at PolicyLink has been primarily in support of the Alliance for Boys and Men of Color, which is a network of over 200 organizations working to transform systems that are failing boys and men of color, their families, and communities. This year, the Alliance is 10 years old. And I'm honored to be able to say I've been there the entire time. It's been a long journey. David knows, Imani knows, and you'll hear from them about some of their work in partnership with that network. But the Alliance has come a tremendously long way in terms of its growth and trajectory, starting in 3 sites in California, Oakland, Fresno, and Los Angeles originally, and now in 12, and moving beyond California in 8 other states outside of California, really focusing on the southern border of the US, where we have partners in Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. And so the growth of the network has occurred quite rapidly, and we're really excited about the way in which people are using data to drive policy. We focus primarily on state policy through the Alliance, but we also have many partners who are organizing in their local communities. And so our team is working to support those local leaders in a variety of different ways. And one of the ways in which we do that is by providing data, tools, and resources. Many of our leaders are developing and implementing policy solutions needed to ensure everyone in their community can flourish and lead self-determined lives. And essentially the four principal goals of the network are focused on winning policy solutions created by and for directly impacted people that address root causes and structural barriers, build empower by working together across issues and communities to create a stronger movement for racial and gender justice, deepening our impact and catalyzing more wins by learning from and supporting each other, and really dismantling racist and unjust systems that fail and harm boys and men of color and other vulnerable people throughout the states in which our network is operating. And so, you know, this body of work is really tied together by the belief that when we work together, we can change the conditions in our communities that keep boys and men of color from flourishing, and doing that work benefits everyone. We are of the belief that you know the communities in which we dwell are shaped by a series of decisions, and all of those decisions are a reflection of values, priorities, and principles. And so we are working hand in hand with partners throughout the country to shape the decisions that are being made at the policy level in ways that create more opportunities for people who are directly impacted by unjust systems, and help people to see a path to liberation. So some of the more urgent and critical challenges of our time that we're focused on from an issue perspective, just to give you a sense of some of the things that people are working around. We're working on creating safe and thriving communities. Um, you know, we're looking at ways in which we can focus on ending patriarchal violence, including intimate partner violence and state violence. We're focused on building economic security so nobody experiences the injustice of poverty, fostering educational equity so that everyone has a fair shot to attend a high quality school that will allow them to achieve their ambitions. And we're also focused on moving from mass incarceration to divestment and decarceration. And our partnership with Tableau has really helped us step into this work in a powerful way. Um, Through the partnership with the Tableau Foundation, we've been able to create powerful visualizations to advance our campaigns and support our network partners in developing their data storytelling skills. PolicyLink is also leveraging Tableau more broadly to achieve systems level and social change. PolicyLink just launched the Racial Equity Data Lab. If you haven't had an opportunity to check that out, I encourage you to please take a look at the National Equity Atlas, and you can find the Racial Equity Data Lab there. It can be a home for your visualizations if you're already using Tableau. And we're really excited about how that might catapult the work of the racial equity movement to another level. Um, this tool will essentially democratize data and make sure that for those of you who are working on policy campaigns, you'll be able to post it and have access to resources that you might not have otherwise had access to. So we're excited about that. Um, and as we think about data and the role it plays in how we further social change, I think it's important for us to think about the Black experience as one where, you know, we've been under attack, right? There has been, um, uh, you know, from the very beginning of the time when we entered this country, to now, um, you know, the Black experience is one that has been rife with um, uh, instances of state violence, instances of, you know, Black communities having to fight for freedom and liberation. And so, you know, our context for Tableau is really kind of like, you know, within that frame, we use Tableau as a way to move our agenda within that context. So as we do our work to make the nation more equitable, for us, it's about building safety, it's about building liberation, and doing that for everyone. And you know, just acknowledging that, you know, the origins of our country are founded on genocide of Native people and patriarchal violence, and that, you know, the Black experience is also tied up within that. Um, we stand in solidarity with so many. I appreciated the introductions at the top, and people mentioned where they were, and just want to give a shout out to our Indigenous family, our Indigenous brothers and sisters, and all Indigenous people who continue to fight for their land back and for food and culture and sovereignty. We stand in solidarity with our Indigenous family and Two-Spirit people and all those who struggle for liberation. I just want to lift that up. There are many tools that we need in order to realize our vision of collective liberation. And at PolicyLink and with our network within the Alliance for Boys and Men of Color, we see data as one of those tools. But it's not just about what the data shows, it's also about who is collecting and analyzing the data, who is telling the story that the data illustrates, and what are the solutions and that communities that are directly impacted by injustice are advocating for. And so we really work closely with community partners to weave all of that in across a number of different issue areas. So every day our partners are working on these kinds of issues, both at the state capitol and in their city halls, to change laws and improve outcomes for boys and men of color, their families and communities. But the capacity isn't always there to do this in the way that I think we all would like. And so having additional tools like those which Tableau provides in order to illustrate the inequities in their community and the potential impact of policy proposals is powerful. So we did a few things in order to kind of build on this capacity. We set up a data fellowship, and you'll hear from two of our fellows, David and Imani. And we set the data fellowship up as a way to grow organizational capacity, to increase available tools, and to allow our community partners to better hold policymakers accountable, and to inspire the base of folks who they're working with, who they're engaging. We started last year, or was that, it was the year before last at this point now. Pandemic time has me losing months and years here. We started with 4 fellows, and 4 fellows from 4 different organizations in 4 different cities in California, and David and Imani are 2 of them. The fellowship ran roughly from March through of 2019 through January of 2020, and the fellows met monthly for group learning sessions. They worked on projects that were a reflection of their local needs, and we basically curated a curriculum that included stock Tableau curriculum, but also included some additional courses that we mixed in to help build their capacity to do things like work with public data. And so, it was 6 days of hands-on training led by Tableau professionals and included access to Tableau Desktop 1 and 2, the trainings and the certificate exam and study prep. So really kind of putting them through the kind of rigorous training that Tableau offers. But through that process, the fellows learned about sourcing data from public sources, analytic approaches to data visualization, how to integrate data and tell stories with data so that they could use it for advocacy. And our team provided some detailed one-on-one consultation and advised on the design of the final projects that they worked on. As a result, the fellows gain greater capacity to analyze and visualize data to be used for policy change. But I don't want to just tell you about the capacity they gained or the benefits of the work and what they learned. I want you to actually hear it from them. And so I'm excited to turn to Imani, who will give us some insight into her experience as a fellow and what she was able to glean from using Tableau for the work that she's advancing locally. Imani.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Mark, so much for that introduction, and thank you, Nicole Antoinette. Hi, everyone. My name is Imani. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am really grateful for the community that the Alliance for Boys and Men of Color Data Fellowship has created for me. And I really got into this fellowship. I grew up in Chicago, as Nicole mentioned in my bio, and just growing up on the west side of Chicago, I realized from a very early age, right, the problems in my community and in the fact and the differences in access to resources, and the differences in the prevalence, right, and the stifling pressure of violence in my community from so many different systems. And so when I went to college, that's really when my organizing journey really began. And actually early on in my organizing, I started incorporating research. So there was a campaign that we were running at Amherst College to encourage the college to spend more in the communities that they extracted so much from. And we relied heavily on data to look at procurement policies and look at the way that money was being spent, and also the opportunities to really have a positive impact on the community around us. And after college, I continued to kind of teach myself a lot of data skills, working with Black folks, a lot of Black birthing parents and mothers in New Orleans. I learned a lot. I learned R by myself and learned a lot of data analysis skills, right? Because I really believed in the programs that we were building in the community and really wanted to gain more skills to teach other people about the impact that we were having. And so things could be, so other folks could learn with and from us, right? And so that we can build more access to the resources that especially Black birthing parents really needed and wanted, instead of kind of what was coming down from the federal government as what our mothers and our families needed. And so when I got into the data fellowship, right, it was with all of this experience and kind of on my organizing journey, realizing that data is something that is a way that I can lend myself, as Nicole Antoinette was like so poignantly and beautifully put it, right, is a way that I can join my community on the front line and contribute to the movement. And I knew research and data and evaluation was going to be part of that for me personally. And so I really wanted to build those skills and really wanted to build my visualization skills more specifically, so I can meet my folks where they were with data, right? So that I could tell stories that really deeply resonated with them and that engaged them and that were tangible. And I think the fellowship definitely did that for me. Like Mark already explained, we got a lot of experience working with public data sources. I got more comfortable in IPOMs. I learned a lot more through Tableau. I learned a lot more about how to create visualizations, right, that are accessible, using color schemes, right, that our community members, our family that are colorblind can still have access to, right, visualizations that are simple and powerful. But I think one of the conversations that really stuck out to me, and I think encapsulates the biggest thing that I took away from the fellowship and from really more the community that was built around all of these learnings, was a conversation that Tia Martinez, who's an amazing advocate and activist and researcher, shared about how to make sure our practices as data analysts don't accidentally, right, actually contribute to the narratives that are oppressing and bringing violence to our community. And so I really looked at making sure that I'm contextualizing, if I'm reporting disparity rates and things like that, I'm contextualizing that information so that we're also talking about the how and why that got us to those disparities, right? So that there's not a story or narrative that can be told from my report that can lead to someone saying, Black young people deserve to experience more violence because they're getting expelled more because they're doing more wrong or causing more harm in school. And it's so really making sure that the data story we're telling is really well contextualized and well thought out, so that I'm not accidentally contributing to harm. And so that those negative actors, right, that are also looking at our data cannot weaponize it against our communities, because there's so much harm that's been done in our communities. And I think, you know, as an evaluator that works so much with communities, Black, Indigenous, and Latinx and AAPI communities, especially a lot of our community members that are immigrants and refugees, they're sick of data. They're sick of researchers coming into the community and extracting so much from them without pouring back into them. So I don't want to be part of that. So those practices have been really important to my journey. And also telling different types of data stories, right? Data stories that only center around disparity rates, that those also inadvertently sometimes center whiteness, right? Whiteness as a solution, whiteness as a target that we're moving towards, right? Where Black, I can tell you Black young people in San Diego are 8 times more likely to be arrested than white youth. But the truth is, I don't want any youth arrested, and I'm not organizing. My liberation for Black young people in San Diego is not just that they're on the equal playing field as white folks or white young people in San Diego. It is that we're realizing a vision for the community that we built together as Black people in San Diego, and we're getting to that place, right? So how can my data be transformed so it really tells the stories that support the visions that we're building at the community level with Black folks? That's where I think this data fellowship and my work with Alliance for Boys and Men of Color and the Tableau Foundation has pushed me to start asking myself those hard questions and also building in those practices. So that looks like incorporating more qualitative work, incorporating different work that contextualizes the data, and also quantitative work that answers the question that looks at the solutions that communities are already imagining for themselves, and shows how and why those things are possible. So as Mark was saying, right, it's more than just the data, it's also about the community solutions it supports. And so what that has looked like to make it a little more tangible for folks, some of the projects that I have used my skills that I gained in the data fellowship towards were with Mid-City CAN. There's been a pilot program for a restorative justice model that came out of a lot of organizing work that was led by a lot of Black and Latinx youth, their parents and their family, to look at how can we repair harm in the community without relying on police. And it's been a very successful model that's run for the last 6 years. Because of that, there is a move to expand it, but the expansion was being done by some actors that were trying to kind of appropriate the parts they liked and leave behind some of the parts they didn't like, right? Like the focus on equity, community oversight and control of the process, and also best practices around, we don't need a restorative circle with a police officer that's arresting our young folks for resisting arrest. There's no there, right? We don't need to circle about that. So what I did as a data analyst was I was able to do kind of a needs assessments for what a countywide program would look like that focused on equity. So we looked at where our young people were being arrested for, where they were being arrested at, right? So to make sure we're expanding to the communities in most need first, not just communities that have the most resources. And also the opposition was saying that, there's not enough cases of young people aren't being arrested as much, and there's not enough cases that will qualify for a restorative circle. And we were able to prove to them that that is actually false. That's not true at all. And that there are cases and there is a need for this program through looking at and analyzing probation data from the probation department, right? So we're able to take their data and serve it right back to them and tell them, we know y'all lying to us, basically. So that's one example. I've also worked with my community to do a cannabis equity study to look at the disparate impacts of the war on drugs in San Diego. and use that to support the movement of like a Black-led, but also BIPOC coalition of folks that were pushing for a social equity cannabis program. And, you know, with that, because of what I learned from the fellowship, I made sure I broke out, you know, our AAPI population, right? Because that's something that I learned, and I was able to do that responsibly as a data analyst, but still making sure that I respected our AAPI community members and the diversity of their experiences, although they're typically just lumped together. And as far as kind of really supporting specifically Black liberation and Black-led organizations through this pandemic, I'm an organizer with March for Black Women San Diego, and we've ran a mutual aid fund where we've redistributed over $200,000 to Black women and femmes in San Diego that are surviving this pandemic. And I created a dashboard for our organizing team to make sure that we're tracking indicators and tracking indicators of success, and also looking at the qualitative data we've collected around relationships and the needs of the community as they explain them to us in our conversations as we're building relationships with them, so that we can continue to build a program and build a community solution in a mutual aid framework that will help us support one another. So that effort has been really successful. We've mostly been using, honestly, peer-to-peer community fundraise resources, but we also have received some grants from the Alliance Healthcare Foundation to build more sustainable framework and infrastructure, so we continue to look at how we can support Black community in San Diego through a mutual aid framework. So those are kind of some examples, right, of one, why I got into it, why I got into the data fellowship, what I've learned, and how I've been able to apply it. But I think the biggest takeaway, right, is that when we're using data for Black liberation, we want to use data in a way that also creates space for us. You know, sometimes we have to use data to fight back and respond to the violent oppression that's happening. But I'm really curious about and trying to build more practices around how we can use data to support Black folks actually having the space to imagine what liberation looks like, because we spend so much time fighting, so much time, you know, just under constant violence that we don't get a chance to imagine. So that's really where my passion lies, and really the questions that being community with folks like David and Mark have led me to kind of explore more critically. And I'm so grateful to be here with y'all.
Thank you, Imani. There aren't enough fire emojis in the Zoom platform to be able to give you, but I definitely want to just thank you and appreciate you for your powerful remarks, and just for being who you are in our movement, in our space. You have continued to be a bright and shining light, and we're thankful for your leadership. I think you had the perfect segue actually to David, and you know, this piece around reimagining is so important. There was a question in the chat that was also asking about where might you be able to find resources to help you frame data and narrative in a more positive light, so that you're not really just, you know, zeroing in on disparities. And maybe we can come back to that a little bit later after David's presentation. But I want to turn to you, David, because I think Imani really sets you up perfectly as we think about reimagining, you know, what liberation looks like, and reimagining what our communities look like. There's a lot of conversation in the BLM movement in particular around reimagining safety, and I know that you've been a central part of that, and your work has been deeply connected to it. We've also been doing some reimagining together around what school safety looks like for our folks. So I think you can weave all these different threads together, and I just want to turn to you to go ahead and share more about yourself and your work.
So thank you so much for that, Mark. And Imani, yes, just yes to all of that, right? So again, what's going on, folks? David Turner, gender pronouns he, him, his. I'm the manager of the Brother Son Selves Coalition. We're a coalition of community-based organizations working to organize boys and young men of color to decriminalize their communities as well as in the school to prison pipeline. And we're one of the really proud and sort of anchor partners for the Alliance of Boys and Men of Color. So a big shout out to Mark and the team from Policy Link, right? So a little bit about me. So again, like it was said in my bio, I'm currently finishing up my doctoral work at UC Berkeley. I initially got involved in research, right, as a field more broadly, as an undergraduate at Cal State Dominguez Hills. I wanted to do research. I went to a school, right, one of the schools in the state of California that at one point in time actually had a pretty sizable Black population. When I first went to Dominguez Hills, it was about 33% Black. Now it's closer to 12, but when I first went there, I went there and there was still, not a lot of other Black men that attended the school. So one of the things I wanted to know was like, okay, how is it that Black men are even getting to college in the first place? My first research project, I wanted to sort of understand, well, how do Black boys get to college? So I interviewed some folks for a project I was working on. And then I took this data back to my old high school, right? Because what the data showed was that supplementary programs and outside sort of resources is what got Black boys to college, right? Like it wasn't necessarily counselors, it wasn't just the GPAs, right? Because these students had all kind of GPAs. It was more so them having access to programs and influences. And then I presented that to my old assistant principal, and they then turned a college access program that I participated in while I was in high school. They turned that into school-wide, right? It was a program at that time called College Summit. And then at that point, that's when I was like, wow, maybe research, right, like can actually do things. Maybe it can have an impact, right? So I got more involved. I became a McNair Scholar on my campus at Dominguez Hills. McNair, for those of you who don't know, is kind of like the upward bound, right? For people who want to go into graduate school and get PhDs. So federally funded program really supported me in my journey. And I was lucky enough to get a research internship, right, with a professor at the time at Vanderbilt University. And she was focusing specifically on financial aid programs in Texas. And I think to Imani's point, we were able to point very clearly to disparities. We were able to point very clearly, right, to the ways how policy, right, like facilitated harm, right, in Texas. And more specifically, as certain policies were passed, we saw explicit drop-off rates, right, like in enrollment for students of color in Texas, right? So it was very clear and apparent that policy was playing a role in harming sort of college interest and college persistence, right? But for me, I was at Vanderbilt, and y'all know Vanderbilt is in Nashville, Tennessee, and we're doing work in Texas, and I'm from California, right? So while this research was very important to me, while it was very important and it demonstrated, I think, because a lot of people, like, they talk about systemic racism as if it's this abstract thing, but not a set of certain policies and practices that are facilitating like racial disparity and white supremacy, right? Like, we very clearly showed that this is racist, right? And I learned how to do that, but it didn't feel personal because it didn't feel connected to me. right? It didn't feel connected to what I was going through. It didn't feel connected to what my communities, right, back home, right, where it was people I know, where it was communities I know, it didn't feel connected to me. So what I had to do, right, or what I wanted to do was I wanted to find a way to make this real. I wanted to find a way to make, to make this research work, these new skills that I was developing. I wanted to find a way to make it concrete. So I initially had got involved with an organization called the Social Justice Learning Institute in the city of Englewood. I was founded by, at that time a PhD candidate, but now PhD, and a former McNair Scholar, guy named D'Artagnan Scorza out of UCLA. And we did something called Youth Participatory Action Research. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's where instead of, a researcher, outside researcher coming in to sort of do an evaluation or like identify disparities and things like that, instead of, somebody doing research on the community, no, it's we come together and we do research as a community together to figure out what the issues are and then how we can transform these issues. So the first campaign I got involved with, right, was a campaign called Measure GG. Right, Measure GG was a campaign that essentially raised property and sales tax in the city of Englewood through a bond measure to initiate $90 million for Englewood Unified School District to rebuild their schools. And again, these are schools that I attended. These are schools that I went to, right? These are schools that young people who I know, right, my neighbors, my community, that we all went to. So we did research on the topic. We developed a survey, right? We then took this survey, right, and then, administered it across all the different, Englewood Unified schools, took the data to Englewood Unified in the city of Englewood, and then, right, got the measure put on the ballot. And after getting the measure put on the ballot, then canvass for the measure. And then, after canvassing for the measure, right, like we got the measure to pass. So, when we talk about research being used as a vehicle for social change, for me, that was the first time I saw it go from top to bottom, right? And it being a community-driven and community-led process. And that's when I knew, right, that in terms of, me wanting to do research, me loving the idea of research, me loving research as a practice, as well as, right, like community organizing and engaging in social transformation, that's when I knew that this is what I wanted to do. This, I don't know how I'm going to do it. I don't know in what ways I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do this, right? For the rest of my life. So, with that being said, right, it was really sort of my catalyst, right, to getting involved in research as a tool for social change. Right. So with that being said, right, I went off to go get my master's at University of Pennsylvania. I started my doctoral program at UC Berkeley. And, the same semester I started my doctoral program was also the same time Michael Brown was killed. Right. So that's when the Black Lives Matter movement, right, like in its first sort of major wave took off. So I'm learning all these theories, learning all these things. And I'm like, okay, how can I begin to take this information and then turn it into something that is going to be useful for our people, right? So that's where I'm like, okay, I'm going to start using my research capacity to be able to support movements, right? Whether that's providing articles, whether that's, helping to pull public data sets, whether that's helping to create data visualizations, so I had been doing this and I've been doing this work for years at this point. And I was okay at it, but I didn't necessarily have the tools to take it to the next level, right? I'm pretty solid with Excel. I even learned GIS. GIS is not the easiest to use. I would tell you that much. I definitely learned, SPSS data. But for me, right, like it wasn't until right that that Mark and the Policy Link team, right, had introduced Tableau to me, right, when I learned that there were not only easier ways to visualize the data, but ways that people can interact with data, so that way we can dive deeper into it, as well as tell a more compelling data story. So real quick, if I can share my screen, I'm my mother's child. My mama used to say, "I'll show you better than I can tell you." So just real quick to show you a little bit of the work that we've been doing here in Los Angeles. The Brother Son Selves Coalition, the coalition that I help to manage. Can folks see my screen? Cool. The coalition that I help to manage, we distributed a youth survey. This is back when we had our old logo. The survey that we facilitated through Qualtrics, right, wanted to sort of identify, like, what are some of the key issues that young people are going through? What do young people want to invest in? What do young people see like the need for public investments being, right? So what we did was we took the data from that survey. We surveyed, over 3,300 people, over 3,300 young people, right? And again, getting 3,300 young people to take a 15 to 20-minute survey is not easy, just to let you know. But in getting them to take the survey, right, we were able to get data from all across LA County, right? So this is a little bit about what our dashboard looks like, So you can see zip codes of where people took the survey at, sexual identity, racial demographics, whether or not young people were impacted by arrests, and again, this really helped us to be able to dive into the data a little bit more. So I'm gonna show you one particular data point so that way you can kind of see what I mean. We had asked young people a series of questions, right? Like whether or not, they wanted to invest more money into youth development, whether or not they felt safe walking at home at night. We asked them all of these different things, right? And we also asked young people how they have been impacted by particular systems. So one of the things that we asked young people is, have they been physically harmed by law enforcement? Right. So in this sort of broader movement, for the movement for Black Lives, the movement, like, people often hear language about defunding the police and don't really know what it means, right? But when we talk about public safety, right, like, this is what we're talking about. So here, for example, we had 128 cases of young people who said explicitly that they had been physically harmed by law enforcement. Either they have been harmed, or they and someone they're close to has been harmed by law enforcement. And what we were able to show through our dashboard was that this particularly was happening in South LA, or South Central, right? For those of you who don't know LA geography, that's where the majority of Black people still stay. We also were able to demonstrate that a quarter of the young people who were physically harmed by law enforcement identified as LGBTQ, 35%, or 1 in 3, were housing insecure. And this is the kicker: 60% of the young people who were harmed by law enforcement in some way had been arrested before. But almost 40% of the young people who had been harmed by law enforcement had never been arrested, right? So these are young people who are just being harmed by law enforcement, right? For no apparent reason. So what does that mean, right? That means that, people in their communities are being harmed by law enforcement if they just come into contact with law enforcement. What we also found was that 500 youth, right, had actually been stopped and questioned by law enforcement at some point, right? So you mean to tell me that young people have a 1 in 5 chance of being harmed by law enforcement just if they come into contact with them? That's a problem, right? But again, as we're talking about, what the data shows, what the data suggests, right? Like, again, this is what our young people directly are telling us. And they're not just telling us this, they're also telling us what they don't want to put money in. They're saying they don't want to put money in these institutions that are harmful and more punishment driven. They want to put money in the youth development. They want to put money in the arts. They want to put money in the youth jobs. They want to put money into college counseling. They want to put money right into wellness centers. They want to put money into mental health, right? A lot of people think that there's a stigma in communities of color around mental health, but 96% of our data set we're people of color, we're young people of color, and they said mental health was one of the top priorities, right? So no, that stigma is not really true, right? So so with that being said, I say all that to say that I'm particularly grateful, right, for the fellowship, right, that I was able to get, through the Alliance for Boys and Men of Color, through Policy Link, because that fellowship helped to give me the tools to be able to tell this collective story. And I'll close on this, right? Again, like I said, I grew up in Englewood, California, from a place called The Bottoms, right? And growing up in Englewood, right, I was the only member of my immediate family to not be incarcerated. So my mother, my sister, my father, everybody in my immediate family had been incarcerated, right? And as well as, cousins, close friends, neighbors, right? So I used to think that was either by mistake or that there was something inherently wrong with us. And then, right, as I began to learn more about systems, as I began to learn more about policy, as I began to learn more about data and then racism, then I understood that no, it was not by mistake, it was by design, right? So what I learned was that data is this collective story that we tell together. That all of these stories, right, regardless of what's happening with them, regardless of how people have been impacted by systems, they begin to form a pattern. And this pattern suggests that certain people are disposable, right? And I know for my work and for the things that I've been working to do, and really grateful to Policy Link to be able to give me not only the tools, but also the language, right, is that we need to combat those ideas, right? And we need to be able to clearly demonstrate what that looks like. And I've been able to do this with Black Lives Matter Los Angeles, through the People's Budget, where we surveyed over 24,000 Los Angeles residents about what they want to invest in. Been able to do this work on behalf of other initiatives in LA County, such as the Measure J initiative, right? And we'll continue, right, like to use the skills that I've gained, right, like in this fellowship to drive data for social change. So with that being said, again, right, like when it comes to using data to organize, right, like it's a powerful tool, and it is the collective story that we tell together.
I just want to thank you, David. It's an honor to be in relationship with you and Imani. We learn so much from the interactions and from your leadership, and it's just a powerful set of learnings and messages. And the thing that really stood out for me is, data can be used to make sense of just some of our everyday experiences, but also to dispel myths and to reimagine what world we want. And so I'm going to take that away from your comments and really appreciate you. I know that there are lots of questions coming in from the audience, and Nicole, Antoinette, I'm not sure how you want to handle that, but I think we're ready to interact with the audience if we can.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you for that. So from a time check perspective, we have Kathy, about 10, 15 minutes for Q&A. We have 6 questions in here, so I think we might have enough time to go through each one of them. So with that being said, I'm not going to go in any particular order. I'm just going to go from top to bottom at that point, not looking at the time in which you did ask your question. So we are going to try and make sure we get through all the questions. So the first one, so we'll go with Eric Moore. Eric Moore is asking, any best practices on how to create, maintain community-owned data initiatives, thinking about data and knowledge democracy. Got to stop the never-ending over-research, underdeveloped trends by researchers, funders, and community-based organizations. Any thoughts on that?
I have so many thoughts on that. I think the first thing, right, is to I think Imani had alluded to this earlier, right? That communities are oftentimes over-researched, right? Especially communities of color. People come in, especially universities, right, and say, hey, we want to study this issue, we want to do this, and they come and extract the stories, the lived experiences, and all of these things, right, from the community, and then provide nothing in return. So I think the real question, right, is, as we're talking about how can we create / maintain community-owned data initiatives, the data in the community already exists, right? It's already there. There are community-based organizations. There are people who have understandings of this work, who have been doing research on this work, who have partnerships with this work. So the real question is, what are we doing, right, to support those initiatives that already exist, right? To give you a perfect example of what this looks like, the Youth Justice Coalition and Justice LA, right, which is another coalition of organizations working to dismantle the criminal justice sort of like regime here in LA County, right? They are in close partnership with this, with the Ralph Bunche Center, right, for African American Studies at UCLA. And they developed a project called the $1 Million Hoods Project. One of the things that Justice LA, and YJC wanted to sort of figure out was, okay, how much money do we really spend to incarcerate people? So UCLA said, yo, we're a research group. You know what, right? Like, let us push on that and we'll support you, with the data that we find. So they sued LAPD to get their data. They sued the sheriffs to get their data. And, comes to find out that there are millions of dollars being spent, to incarcerate folks, right? And these are, conservative estimates based on certain methodologies, right? And then they were able to take this data and then use it, right, like in their advocacy to push for alternatives to incarceration, as well as to decarcerate and then move people out of, the juvenile and criminal justice systems, right? So again, right, like that partnership was more of a, how can we support you? And I think oftentimes, especially for researchers, right, we get in this mode of where we think we know what people need, but the community knows what they need. I think we just need to be open and willing enough to go to the community and listen about what their needs are, and then deliver on what it is they need, right? When we can do things like that, then, I think then we change the dynamic of what research means in the community.
Thank you, David, for that answer. We appreciate that. We do have another question from Alexander.
Nicole Antoinette, I think Imani was going to chime in too.
Okay, I'm sorry, Imani.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. Yeah, just really quickly to add on what David already laid out so eloquently, I think definitely the relationship with the community has to be at the center of that work. And I think additionally, we have to be bolder in how we approach funding, because I think a lot of times the relationships with funders dictates the type of research that we do and we don't do. And I think being really stepping out and trying to be bolder about how we are in relationship with these big foundations, if that's how we're going to get our money to do research, and also think creatively about different ways to get the resources we need to do the research we want to get done that the community deems is important, is a really other important part of that relationship. Because once you're listening to the community and they tell you what they need and what they want, then the next step is also making sure that we don't allow the people that hold the money, right, because they're tied up in systemic white supremacy and they have all of the money right now, we don't let them dictate the way that we run our research.
Awesome. Thank you, Imani, for that answer as well. So we got a question in from Alexander Newton. Where do you find and how do you incorporate a diverse variety of data sets to tell a more holistic story outside of the standard publicly available data sets? Any suggestions on ways to quantify equity or inequity within accessible data sets?
I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but I agree with kind of how David started off his answer to the last question. A lot of it's already there in the community. And David was talking about, community-based organizations that are already doing research. Organizers are naturally reflective. Like organizers do great evaluation work, debriefing from meetings. Like A lot of the folks that are plugged into the community are already reflective, whether or not they call it evaluation research, but they have a lot of data there. And I think even beyond like organizers, the community-based organizations, actually reaching out to the community and doing some of that quantitative work can really help you contextualize even the data that you get from public data sources. So for example, I'm running a case study that's looking at some of our restorative our organizing and move contributions to the movement for restorative justice in San Diego. And it's a community-based and community-led action-oriented research project. So I started off like with the community, asking them what questions were important for them, and also who are the community leaders, who are the folks in the system, outside of the system that I need to talk to and do interviews with. And I think those interviews, I'm still analyzing data, but I think that those interviews are going to really help me contextualize a lot of the analysis of public data sources. So even if and when it's appropriate to report disparity rates, I have that contextual analysis to talk about the how and the why of how the disparities happen, right? And kind of as David pointed to with his example with his research at Vanderbilt around looking at disparity rates and linking them to policy. So you kind of have a time-based, right, analysis if you can establish like a natural control group. I've done similar work to show the impact of our organizing to ensure that during the pandemic, some of the lines that our BIPOC communities, especially in low-income transit-dependent communities, relied on weren't closed. So Mid-City Can advocated for that, and I was able to identify some control groups of the buses and the routes that were shut down compared to the ones that weren't, and was able to demonstrate to, again, having conversations with funders because it's important, but demonstrate to our funders, right, like why this organizing is important in a way that they really understand, which is sometimes quantitative data. So we're able to show, hey, this mattered. If we weren't there organizing and advocating and working in coalition to ensure these lines weren't cut, like this was going to have an impact on community. And so I think establishing those natural controls, like really understanding your context by being in community, in relationship with community, will, one, provide an opportunity to collect more qualitative data, to find out what data already exists that provide that context, and three, be really smart about the ways that you analyze public data resources so you can do things like set up those types of tests and have those statistical hypotheses so you can really tell a story that's even more impactful with public data sources.
And the only thing I would add to Imani's very full and excellent answer is to, as you're in relationship with community organizers and community groups, to be clear about what their target is, to understand how your analysis can be shaped by what their policy targets or policy goals are. And so, Imani talked about the geographic specificity. I think that's really critical, and it will vary if you're talking about an assembly district or a Senate district or a congressional district or a city council district. So, really kind of trying to understand what level of nuance is necessary in order to further a policy goal is critical. And that comes through the relationship. I mean, all of our work as a research and action institute is done in support of campaigns and coalitions and some of these partners who you're hearing from right now. And just would want to encourage you to not get into transactional interactions, but to, be deeply involved in long-term engagement with groups as they are seeking justice on whatever issue, because most of the time it will take a significant amount of time in order to achieve the change that they seek.
Awesome. Thank you for those answers. We have two questions related to data visualization. So we're going to combine those two questions as a two-parter. One came in from Matt Frazier. What has been the most impactful data insight or visualization you've used to date to create change? Another question that's related to data visualization came from Kim Garcia For those working with youth and young adults, any tips, tools, or resources that can introduce them to data visualization? So what have you done to date to create change in terms of data insight or visualizations? And what tips, tools, and resources around data visualization can you provide for us today?
Hey. So I think with the piece around, so I'll start with the youth piece first. Young people are like low-key nerdy. Like a lot of folks kind of don't realize that, but when you get them in front of the data and then like they start getting into it, they're like, oh, what? Well, what happens if we do this? Yo, what happens if we do this? Right? Or how about if we try it like this? So real quick, what I'll do for you real fast is show you one of those data visualizations, right, that our young people found really interesting, that let us know that we needed to target a specific type of policy. So if you can see my screen, this is the same Brother Son Selves Coalition survey, it's just visualized different. So it's visualized based as no one I'm close to has been impacted, someone I'm close to has been impacted, I have, which is the brighter red, or I and someone I'm close to have, right? And one of our top demands for our coalition was that we need to eliminate youth arrest. We need to just stop youth arrest and try to eliminate contact between law enforcement and communities of color, right? So here's why. When we look at this data and we look at like people who have been impacted, by certain issues, so whether or not they've been arrested or been detained or deported by ICE, been in a fight, been kicked out of school, we see that there's some red. A lot of people know folks, but most folks really don't know anybody, right, who have been harmed by a system in some way. When we filter by who has been arrested, you see how much red comes up on the screen now, right? So this was one of the most impactful data visualizations that I've used with young people to demonstrate like why we needed to do some certain things. And our young folks said, yo, this has to be a top issue because this is what's happening, right? This is what's happening in our communities, right? So I think the real way to do it is just to show young people how to do it themselves. And then when young people learn how to do it themselves, learn how to analyze and interpret the results for themselves, trust me, they will play around with it and start looking for insights that you would have never thought of.
Yeah, I would say similarly, get the data in front of young people and get the tools in front of young people, and also, again, be in community with young folks, and they already know like what's important to them, and then be willing and able to show them how data can be used to, right, as Mark was talking about, advance like what are their targets and what are their campaign goals, even if they're not articulating it using those words, but be able to explain how you can use data to advance that. So I'm on the advisory board with Youth Will, which is a organization in San Diego, and I did a kind of a data workshop with the youth organizers who all had campaign goals already. And I used public data sources, Google Sheets, and a couple of visualizations using Google, right? All open source free software that they can use and have access to probably forever. And showed them, hey, this is how we can look at disparities. This is how we calculate arrest rates. And then those are really, a lot of the tools I use to do that are really flexible and can be adapted to look at a lot of different issues, right? And I walked them through that, and then we had a kind of a conversation and follow-up conversations about how we could use data for their campaigns. But I agree with David, like our young people are very intelligent and smart and very so much more tech savvy. So just getting it in front of them and asking them what they need and them being there to support them and have their back is just such an important way to be an adult accomplice in this work and ally, especially have data skills already.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. And David, I do think that when you did answer the one that to date that has created change, a visualization, you did show us a visualization. So thank you for that, David, and thank you, Imani, for that answer as well. If we're going to, let's move right along with another question that came in, and Mark, you had mentioned it earlier. And it came in from Eric Moore. Any best practices when working with local and state legislators to create policy? No, that's not the right one. The one was around any good resource on how to think, frame contextual data to avoid those negative narratives around disparities and lived experiences.
I just want to shout out Berkeley Media Studies Group. I know that they are masterful communicators, and Kim is on the call or on the webinar. They have great resources depending on the issue that you're exploring. And there are a number of different communication shops that I think are trying to address some of this as well in terms of looking at how to better communicate around race, ethnic inequities, racial and ethnic inequities in ways that don't further stereotypes or negative narratives. But I think it's a combination of both data science and also communication savvy. And David and Imani, I wonder if you have any resources or tools that you'd like to offer for the group.
I'm just reading David's comment in the chat. Mark is the plug for sure. So thinking about, I brought that up in my initial remarks because it's been really important to my journey. And I think I kind of already talked about it, but I think, you know, being in conversation with community and really respecting their voice as experts, and also and their understanding of the how and whys the disparities how and whys the disparities are what they are can actually help guide your research, right? So after you kind of get the community's input on how and why the disparities came to be, that can help you, one, look to collect more quantitative data that can better contextualize your disparity rates so you're not furthering negative narratives. It can also help you look for existing research that's already out there that explains the how and the why. Maybe it's not from your community specifically, but it can still be used to provide that context to show we already know, like, for example, with the cannabis equity report, I was reporting a lot of arrest rates, but there's already so much research out there that shows that the racial disparities in arrest rates cannot be explained by difference in actual cannabis usage, right? Because Black folks and white folks use cannabis at similar rates, but the disparities in arrests are insurmountable. And so I think, like, talking to community first, and then either looking to collect data or looking for data that already exists can really help contextualize those disparity rates.
All right, we are getting to the end of today's session. We did get something in. Unfortunately, we may not have time for 2 remaining questions, but there was one around volunteering. Ed, apologize, I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce your last name right, Hurek. Would love to hear if any of the organizations or speakers, or you're looking for any volunteers to do some analytics needed in your organizations so people can get involved. Any opportunities for volunteers?
I mean, well, look, if you want to work, I'll put you to work. But I think to be quite honest, right? The best way to volunteer, is to is to do so in community, right? Like where you're at, right? So So what I would do, or what I would pose is, like, where are you located? Are there any universities? Are there any community-based organizations out there where you can get involved? And then get involved in a project, right? Support a project, and support a project with the understanding that the community doesn't have anything to give you in return and doesn't have to give you anything in return, right? You're there literally just to support the mission, the cause, and the goals of the organization, and whatever their intentions are, right? So with that being said, right, support, right? Like I said, if you want to do something specifically in LA County, we can plug you, but if you want to get involved where you're at, then I would strongly encourage, to check out some of the local organizations doing work on issues that you care about.
Wow, thank you so much. With that being said, let's go ahead and close out with Joan. She'll close us out today in an invitation.
Wow, wow, wow. I hope you all can hear me. I think our future is going to be in good hands with Mark, David, and Imani. Very, very positive information. I just say wonderful job. And this purpose-driven event that Data Lingual Institute and the Blacks in Analytics put together is just our inaugural event. And we're just hoping that it inspired you, because I tell you, I am full, and I'm so appreciative of the great wisdom and the ideas and the remarks that were shared today. I want to publicly thank Tableau for their partnership in creating the first ethnically focused group, and of course, our iconic panel, Policy Link and Columbia University, for this virtual conversation on trends and advancement in data, school opportunities, and how we can advocate for change. As we stated earlier, Data Lingual Institute's mission is to address racial and gender bias in data and in algorithms, and advance diversity and inclusion in data careers, and to improve data literacy for us. We know that data is the new currency, and we know that it's going to affect every aspect of our lives, and we have to be at the table or we'll be on the menu. Being here today proves that you're interested in this mission, and we need your help. The Blacks in Analytic Tableau user group that you're now part of, we're making you honorary members right now, are going to have future meetings on topics that address the intersection of data and analytics, culture, and social change. And we want to hear from you. We want you to be on the front line, as Nicole shared earlier, and give us topics for future meetings. And I have a little incentive for you. You can submit your suggestions on our websites at blacksinanalytics.org. Again, blacksinanalytics.org. The first 4 people who submit suggestions will win gift certificates to the Tableau store, courtesy of the Tableau organization. Thanks again for your participation, and we can't wait to celebrate you at another exciting event that we're going to have in the future. And back to you, Kathy. Any other closing remarks? I guess that's a thank you. All right now. So I think we're going to close out. Is that all, Nicole?
Yeah, that is it. Thank you all.
Yes.
Look for notifications going forward on our next event.
Yes. All right. And we're going to have it all posted. Thank you, guys. Mark, David, Imani, you guys are the best. We got a bright future with leaders like that.
Thank you so much.